Mismatched. How America's educational system fails to prepare students for today's workforce. Written by Janet Johnson. Narrated by 11 Labs. This audiobook explores the broken machinery of American education through the eyes of someone who has experienced it from every angle. As a student dismissed by the system, as a teacher fighting its barriers, and as a researcher documenting its failures. Dedication. Dedication. To Dr. Lee V. Stiff, mentor, visionary mathematics educator, and the embodiment of integrity in education. You showed me that challenging inequity required more than theory. It demanded evidence, action, and unwavering determination. Your guidance transformed not just my understanding of mathematics education, but my understanding of purpose. I've never forgotten what you told me years ago, that you entered mathematics simply because you excelled at it, with no real awareness of your career options. That if you had it to do over again, you might have chosen to start a plumbing business instead. This revelation, from someone who shaped mathematics education nationally, perfectly illustrates the broken guidance system this book confronts. Thank you for seeing potential where others saw limitations, for insisting on quality mathematics instruction for all students, and for teaching me that the most powerful path to equity is not through studying failure, but through expanding opportunity. Your wisdom runs through these pages like a current. This book stands as one small part of the work you made possible. Forward. By Jean Joyner. In an ideal educational environment, this book would be prominently placed on every school administrator's desk with well-worn pages, highlighted sentences, and margins filled with notes. Part autobiography and part guide for using data to overcome biases. This compelling story highlights the need for school district leaders to rethink their criteria for how decisions about students are made. The belief that poverty and high academic achievement are incompatible means that students are never afforded opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities. Similarly, the outdated belief that community colleges are for less capable students who will move into low-paying jobs ignores current economic realities. Consider the world of sports where talent trumps zip codes. What would happen if coaches subscribed to the belief that basketball is a game for tall players and anyone under 6 feet tall lacks the potential to be a successful college basketball player? Short athletes would automatically be rejected, and Duke, with its plethora of fans, would have missed the talents of 5'8" Spencer Hubbard. Outcomes that result from actions based on outdated mindsets are self-fulfilling prophecies. Today, there is a more effective way to influence achievement goals. Data that are gathered, analyzed, and used become tools for making decisions that open, rather than close, doors of opportunity for students. Look into a mirror. Reflect on your beliefs and decision-making strategies as you accompany Janet Johnson on her journey. Learn from her experiences. Author's note. Throughout this book, I have changed certain names to protect individuals' privacy. These pseudonyms will be clearly indicated when first introduced. All schools and school district names are changed, but the incidents described are real. Chapter 1. The Great Sorting Machine. In 1974, a guidance counselor's office in America's industrial heartland became the stage for a quiet betrayal. Beneath pennants from colleges I would never visit and posters lying about opportunity, I sat reviewing my senior year: chemistry, advanced biology, calculus. My grades were excellent. My test scores were strong. None of it mattered. These courses are for students who are going to college, the school counselor said. You're not the kind of person who goes to college. The words hit like a slap, making me question myself instead of her. Mrs. Parsons, 5'4" with bulletproof hair and cardigans like armor, spoke with the certainty of someone who had never been wrong or never had to admit it. Her office smelled like peppermint and something worn out. My mother, a first-generation college graduate, should have been proof I could make it. But our address in a factory town neighborhood shouted louder than grades ever could. When Mrs. Parsons said I wasn't college material, something folded inside me. It wasn't sadness. It was surrender. If the official gatekeeper said no, Who was I to argue? I pivoted fast. What about drafting? I said. I'm good at math and art. It was a survival move, a career path that did not require the forbidden college degree. She tilted her head like she had seen a dog walk on two legs. Well, she said, stretching the word, drafting is unusual for a girl, but you do have the spatial skills. She made it sound like I carried some rare genetic mutation. The guidance office ran on street addresses, not transcripts. Talent meant nothing without the right address. I saw it the moment she spoke. Only calculus class stayed, saved by Mr. Kessler's endorsement. That one crack showed the real system. College prep classes needed hidden permissions no one explained until you slammed into the walls. Chemistry and advanced biology vanished from my schedule. Casualties of opportunities never offered. Looking back through the lens of my professional work decades later, I would discover something even more troubling. Mr. Kessler likely had no idea that other teachers used completely different criteria for their recommendations. When my company, EdStar, analyzed recommendation practices across schools, we found teachers operating from wildly different frameworks, some recommending based solely on grades, others on perceived motivation, still others on family background or perceived college potential. Most troubling of all, these teachers rarely discussed their criteria with colleagues, each assuming everyone followed similar standards. Mr. Kessler, seeing my mathematical ability, might have been genuinely shocked to learn that Mrs. Parsons had blocked my other advanced courses based on something other than my academic performance. This silent inconsistency created a system where student opportunities depended more on which teacher they happened to encounter than on any coherent educational philosophy. Mrs. Parsons never spelled it out. I understood the minute I stepped into the drafting room. Unusual for a girl did not come close. The drafting room sat in a far wing of the building, down a hallway that might as well have had a "No Girls Allowed" sign nailed above it. It was another country, ruled by boys, sealed off with its own language and laws. I walked in on the first day, 23 boys, 0 other girls. The room went dead silent, like someone pulled the plug. Mr. Berkowitz, the drafting teacher, looked up with the face of a man who had just seen a penguin in the Sahara. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice made it clear he hoped the answer was no. I handed him my course slip. He stared at it, then at me, then back at the slip. "You're in this class?" The word "your" did all the work. Not just confusion, judgment, doubt. You could hear the unsaid part. "You're a girl. In here." It did not take long to see the bigger picture. As Mr. Berkowitz explained basic fractions to a room struggling to keep up, I realized what this was. Not a path to careers, a holding pen, a place for kids the system had written off. These were the sons of factory workers, railroad men, janitors. In our town, a factory job was not second best. It was the goal. Their fathers came home with oil-stained hands and broken backs, proud union men whose time was already ending. The brutal truth: these boys were being trained for jobs that were already disappearing, like teaching horse and buggy repair as the Model T rolled off the line. The split in my life grew wider every day. In calculus, I moved through derivatives and integrals without blinking. In drafting, I watched the teacher struggle to get students through simple arithmetic. The irony was sharp enough to cut. I had been pushed out of college prep because I was working class. Now, in vocational, I did not fit either. I was too female. I was too academic. Educational homelessness. No place to belong. Looking back, the system was not just unfair. It was wildly inconsistent. I ended up in calculus because Mr. Kessler saw my work and recommended me. He did not have to fight for me. Other working-class students made it into calculus, too. Placement was not purely about background. It was about whatever standard an individual teacher decided to apply. Maybe Mr. Kessler saw only ability. Maybe he assumed I came from a different background. It hardly mattered. In that school system, your future depended less on what you could do than on how the adults around you chose to interpret it. It was roulette, not guidance. The surprising part is not how much has changed since 1974. It is how little. Walk into almost any American high school today. Behind all the slogans about college and career readiness, the same sorting still happens. Students are divided early into two tracks: university-bound and alternatives. The cost of that division has only grown. We send students into college weighed down by debt and broken promises. We leave technical jobs vacant because career and technical education still carries the stigma of being for the less capable. We keep pretending that thinking and doing are separate skills meant for separate kinds of people. The vocabulary has changed. Vocational ed became CTE, but the basic structure stayed the same. It still sorts students by class. It still limits opportunity while pretending to expand it. Meanwhile, the real world always knew better. My father's life showed it clearly. Every new certification he earned meant more skills, more responsibility, better jobs. In the workplace, learning and advancement went hand in hand. On the factory floor, merit mattered. In school, merit took a backseat to perception, assumption, and gatekeeping. That gap between education and the real world still exists. It still hurts students. It still weakens communities. It still starves industries that desperately need talent. Mrs. Parsons was not malicious. She was a loyal cog in the machine. Systems protect themselves not through grand conspiracies, but through everyday judgments that quietly shut doors. We have kept the same broken system for too long. It is time to stop pretending it ever worked the way we said it did. The gatekeeping power of school counselors was not just about misjudging ability. Sometimes, it was a weapon used openly to enforce social boundaries. At my own high school, Galesburg High School, a black student named Alva Early learned this the hard way. Alva was one of the top students in the class of 1959. He had secured admission to Northwestern University and the University of Chicago. But in the spring of his senior year, he made a decision that changed everything. He attended a picnic organized by the local NAACP. The picnic took place on the white side of Lake Story, a quiet challenge to the town's segregation. Before the event, his school counselor warned him. If he attended, he would not graduate. His scholarships would vanish. When Alva chose to go anyway, the counselor kept the promise. Despite his academic record, Alva was blocked from graduating. His college acceptances were rescinded. His future was torn away, not because of academic failure, but because he sat with his family on the wrong side of a public park. Fortunately, Alva's story did not end there. Knox College president Dr. Sharvie Umbeck stepped in and offered him admission. Alva studied there, transferred to the University of Illinois, earned a law degree, and later worked for the Illinois Attorney General's office. Decades later, at a class reunion, his classmates arranged for him to finally receive the diploma he had rightfully earned. Alva's case shows the raw power school counselors held over students' futures. One decision, one recommendation withheld, one opportunity erased. It also reveals the truth about the system itself. It was never just about academic guidance. It was about gatekeeping. Sometimes quietly, sometimes brutally. And the outcomes were not based on ability, but on maintaining an invisible social order. This happened at my school, to someone walking the same hallways I did, and it was not an accident. It was the system working exactly as designed. Chapter 2. Welcome to the Machine. By 1992, I had completed a strange transition. I had gone from being sorted to doing the sorting. If America's educational system were a magician's act, I had moved from audience member to backstage apprentice to the one who knew where all the trapdoors were hidden. My journey from confused teenager in Mrs. Parsons's office to PhD-wielding education researcher was not a story of exceptional achievement. It was a guided tour through the elaborate machinery of American educational gatekeeping. The view was not flattering. Imagine walking into a gleaming hospital only to find surgeons using leeches and pharmacists mixing potions by the stars. Now imagine everyone is perfectly satisfied with the arrangement. That is American education when it comes to the division between academic and technical learning. We are running an industrial era sorting system with space age rhetoric, like a Model T dressed up with racing stripes. This book explores what I have seen from both sides of the desk. As a student told I was not college material, as a teacher who watched talented students redirected away from opportunity, and as a researcher who saw how our assumptions about learning remain stuck in a world Henry Ford would recognize. As a young mathematics teacher in the early 1980s, I got my first real-world test of the system. Maria Vasquez sat in the front row of my 8th grade algebra class, solving complex equations with the easy grace of someone born to the task. When I recommended her for the advanced track in high school, the counselor's response was so predictable I could have written the script myself. "She is not really advanced track material," he explained, not even lowering his voice while Maria waited in the hallway. You know, given her background, Maria's background, as daughter of a factory worker and a hospital janitor, from a neighborhood where pizza places would not deliver after dark, had apparently infected her mathematical ability. The system diagnosed her with a terminal case of working-class origins. Over the next 3 decades, I watched this same scene repeat. The actors changed, but the script stayed the same. Smart, poor kids sorted away from advanced tracks. Technical education treated as a last resort for the academically deficient. Liberal arts degrees praised as automatic tickets to success. Vocational education teaching outdated skills for jobs that no longer existed. Research driven by opinions instead of evidence. Data treated like the family secret no one wanted to discuss. At the heart of all these patterns sits a single, persistent misconception. The idea that thinking and doing are separate activities, carried out by separate classes of people. Consider the modern manufacturing environment. Workers operate computer-controlled machinery, analyze production data, and navigate complex technological systems. These roles demand the same capabilities we claim to build in college tracks: analytical thinking, problem-solving, technological fluency. Yet our educational system still treats technical education as a lesser path, even as community colleges quietly build sophisticated programs that could launch students into these opportunities. In 1993, I sat in a meeting where a major school district planned its technology curriculum. The room buzzed with educational credentials: PhDs in curriculum design, master's degrees in educational leadership, certificates in leadership. What nobody had was real experience with technology beyond using WordPerfect. The resulting curriculum focused almost entirely on teaching students how to use software. It taught them to navigate menus, not to understand, create, or change the systems they would depend on. Most critically, it failed to teach students to do things that were only possible with technology, the transformative capabilities that separate true digital literacy from mere button pushing. But will students really need to program computers? Asked Dr. Humphrey, the curriculum director, his voice skeptical, like someone being offered alien abduction insurance. Most of them will just need to use the applications, right? What he missed, what the entire committee missed, was that technology wasn't just a fancy alternative to existing tools. It enabled entirely new ways of working with information. While we taught students to format documents in WordPerfect, we could have been teaching them to build interactive spreadsheet models that would instantly recalculate complex scenarios. Instead of showing them how to enter data into a simple database, we could have taught them to analyze patterns in large data sets that would be impossible to process by hand. Rather than having them create static presentations, we could have shown them how to build simulations that would test theories and visualize abstract concepts. The gap wasn't just in what students learned about computers. It was in what they never discovered about the new intellectual landscape technology had created. A landscape where complex systems could be modeled, where massive information could be sorted instantly, and where patterns invisible to the human eye could emerge through the right analysis. We were handing them digital hammers while failing to show them the cathedral they could build. This was 1993, and at the very moment the first digital revolution was rewriting the rules of the global economy. The failure to see that understanding technology would become as fundamental as understanding mathematics was not just short-sighted. It was educational malpractice. but it made perfect sense inside a system that had spent a century insisting that thinkers and doers were two different species. Meanwhile, the smart poor kids of the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s were teaching themselves. They stayed up late with basic programming manuals, explored dial-up bulletin board systems, and later taught themselves HTML and JavaScript from library books. They built the cybersecurity industry not because schools prepared them, but because schools ignored them. The system's blind spot became their opportunity. Today, we have perfected an even more damaging form of educational sorting. We send academically talented, low-income students to four-year colleges to earn liberal arts degrees, where they accumulate debt that will follow them for decades. We still send students labeled academically deficient into career and technical education programs. And when a smart poor kid chooses CTE, counselors often assume they must belong in remedial courses, an assumption so deeply embedded that it's built into the system's architecture. Even in 2025, examining the websites of major school districts reveals an institutional bias hiding in plain sight. The recommended math pathway for CTE students remains remedial math, as though technical careers don't demand mathematical sophistication. Meanwhile, in my evaluation work with community colleges, I witnessed the consequences firsthand. Advanced manufacturing programs offering pathways to stable, well-paying careers watch students struggle and fail because they lack the very mathematical foundation that was deliberately withheld from them in high school. The system creates the deficiency, then uses that deficiency to justify the original sorting. It's a perfect closed loop of institutional logic, reinforcing itself at every turn, remarkable only in how methodically it undermines both individual potential and workforce development. The machinery doesn't just sort students, it manufactures the outcomes it claims merely to predict. Education grants, once a tool for addressing inequality, have morphed into an institutional addiction to what I call pedagogical snake oil. Workshops, curriculum resources, and intervention programs promise transformation, but deliver little more than a temporary sugar high of enthusiasm. The education grants economy thrives on a kind of magical thinking, where good intentions are valued more than measurable outcomes, and professional perception counts more than student learning. I once watched a school district spend $2.8 million on a 3-year reading intervention program that resulted in lower reading scores. When I pointed this out, using the district's own assessment data, the program director looked genuinely puzzled. "But the teachers really like the program," she said, as if that were the real measure of success. The fact that students were not learning to read better seemed almost irrelevant compared to the professional satisfaction of the adults involved. This was not an isolated case. In district after district, I watched data that should have triggered serious reflection, instead provoked defensive reactions. The problem was not that educators did not care. Most cared deeply. The problem was that they had been trained to see educational value through professional consensus, rather than measurable student outcomes. Which brings us to data itself, the dark matter of education. It exists all around us, yet most educators are taught to believe that understanding data requires some specialized, inaccessible knowledge. In 2015, I watched a school district argue that identifying top-scoring students for advanced math placement would require manually reviewing paper files over an entire summer. That argument would have been outdated in 1985, let alone in the 21st century. This attitude toward data is not accidental. It reflects a deep institutional bias. Data skills are seen as technical, and therefore lower in status than the abstract thinking supposedly fostered by academic education. The irony is obvious to anyone paying attention. Data analysis requires exactly the kind of critical thinking and analytical reasoning that academic education claims to value, yet the system remains blind to it. Each of these patterns, the separation of thinking from doing, the devaluation of technical education, the focus on credentials over capabilities, the resistance to meaningful data analysis, reveals a different side of the same underlying problem. Our educational system still clings to an outdated model of human capability that sorts students into artificial categories with little connection to individual potential or economic reality. Throughout this book, I will trace these patterns through my own experiences. From that moment in Mrs. Parsons's office in 1974, through decades of watching the same machinery operate under new labels and new justifications, the core mechanisms have remained the same. I will show how even well-meaning efforts to create a more equitable system often ended up reinforcing the very barriers they were meant to dismantle. And I will explore how our failure to reconcile academic and technical education has blocked both individual advancement and broader economic growth. The stakes could not be higher. Every year, millions of students make educational choices that shape not only their careers, but their financial futures. These patterns do not just affect individual lives, they determine our collective ability to build the workforce that modern economies demand. By examining them clearly, we can start moving from blind tradition toward deliberate, effective change. First, though, we have to understand how we arrived here. We need to see how a system built for the industrial economy still shapes educational opportunities in a digital age. We need to confront how reforms that promised equity sometimes strengthened the barriers they meant to remove. We need to look closely at how the false separation between academic and technical education has led to misalignments between what credentials represent and what modern work requires. Most importantly, we have to recognize how a system that claims to prepare every student for success continues to sort them by social class rather than actual potential. The most damaging flaw in our educational machinery is not just that it is outdated or inefficient. It is that it systematically misdirects talent at exactly the moment when developing talent is more critical than ever. The story begins, as so many educational stories do, with a contradiction between what we say and what we do. We claim to value both academic and technical learning, yet we have built a system that treats technical education as a fallback for those who fail at the academic track. We claim to prepare students for future careers, yet we rely on practices shaped by economies that no longer exist. We claim to make decisions based on data, yet we shy away from the kinds of analysis that might challenge our most comfortable beliefs. Understanding these contradictions is not a theoretical exercise. As automation and artificial intelligence transform the workplace, our ability to prepare students for emerging opportunities depends on facing the failures of our current system honestly. We cannot create real pathways to modern careers while clinging to outdated ideas about who belongs in technical education and what technical work demands. The journey from Mrs. Parsons' office to today's educational landscape is more than a personal story. It is a window into how we have preserved artificial barriers between academic and technical education, and how we might finally begin to dismantle them. By understanding how we arrived here, we can start building educational practices that serve both individual potential and the needs of a changing society. Welcome to the machine. It is time to learn how it really works. Chapter 3. The Hidden Ladders. The summer of 1974 offered a different vision of opportunity across the Midwest. In the pre-dawn haze, we teenagers waited at the edges of cornfields for buses to take us to corn detasseling jobs. The work paid well above minimum wage, not for its complexity, but for its mix of discomfort and repetition. My hands, which had months earlier manipulated calculus equations with ease, now reached through rows of wet stalks, pulling tassels to create hybrid seed corn. There was a certain irony to the work. Deemed unsuitable for high school chemistry, I now played a small role in agricultural genetics. After quick clothing changes, many of us went to evening jobs. I manned the Dairy Queen counter, computing orders and change by hand. No cash register. No doubts about my ability. The contrast with my guidance counselor's low expectations was impossible to ignore. The path to college emerged through an unexpected channel. A friend's mother, who handed me a state college application. No counselor, no advice. Just one act of kindness that bypassed the usual barriers. My acceptance led to a single semester in the dorms, paid for by summer wages from cornfields and ice cream counters. But there were barriers no one warned me about. I knew nothing of work-study programs, Pell Grants, or financial aid beyond athletic scholarships. Savings ran out fast. Without support, the mathematics was brutally simple. Rising costs, no income, no hidden lifelines. College collapsed under financial reality. Returning home, it seemed my guidance counselor's judgment had been correct. But the failure had nothing to do with intellect. It had everything to do with the hidden knowledge about resources only insiders seemed to have. The next turn came at a local diner. Between pouring coffee and clearing plates, I explained calculus across tables to Knox College students I was tutoring. One asked, "Why aren't you in college?" When I answered, "I can't afford it," he said, "but there are scholarships." What had been invisible to me was obvious to him. His father, a Knox College professor, helped open doors I never knew existed. To him, scholarships were everyday opportunities. To me, they were secret passages hidden behind walls I did not even know to question. When the full academic scholarship offer arrived, it exposed the arbitrary nature of the barriers that had once seemed unbreakable. The same academic ability that could not unlock high school chemistry now opened doors to higher education. Yet even at college, exclusion operated in quieter ways. Career centers offered vague advice about liberal arts and enrichment, but little real guidance. True career pathways were built through informal networks, not official channels. Although my mother had earned a college degree, I received no practical advice from home about scholarships, career planning, or navigating university systems. Knowledge about higher education worked like a hidden currency that many students, regardless of their parents' formal education, never had access to. The American education system resembled an old castle. The grand entrances marked meritocracy were guarded tightly. Privilege determined who passed through. Meanwhile, hidden doors allowed insiders to move freely. In graduate school, however, pure academic ability opened new doors. A teaching assistantship at Northern Illinois University paid tuition and expenses. In the graduate math department, social class lost much of its weight. Proofs and theories mattered more than pedigree. But even this victory came with uncertainty. A master's degree was not a clear career map. In the absence of guidance, teaching offered the most practical path forward. In middle school classrooms of the early 1980s, I saw the machinery of gatekeeping from the other side. Working-class students, no matter how talented, were routinely steered away from advanced courses. When I pushed for their placement into higher tracks, administrators responded bluntly, "You don't understand how placement is done." The unwritten rules became clear. Seats in advanced classes were unofficially reserved for children of PTA leaders and prominent community families. Talent alone was not enough. Even when there were enough qualified students for a second 8th grade algebra class, I was told no. The reason? High schools did not have enough advanced track math teachers. Rather than expand opportunity, the system restricted it. After appealing to the school board, I finally won the right to recommend every qualified student for the advanced math track in high school. Still, the pattern remained. Access was controlled. Scarcity was manufactured. Later, I learned that other schools had to wait and see how many seats remained after my students were placed before recommending their own. Advanced mathematics was not being rationed because of student ability. It was rationed to preserve existing hierarchies and because of lack of resources. Through persistent advocacy, many of my students entered advanced tracks and excelled. Their success revealed the truth. The barriers had never been about merit. They had been about maintaining social class divisions. The system's greatest success was its invisibility. Those excluded were led to believe they had failed individually, not that the system had failed them. From both sides of the desk, the message became clear. Academic achievement did not guarantee opportunity. Success depended on navigating hidden ladders most students never even saw. As the 1980s progressed and personal computers entered classrooms, the established gatekeeping patterns faced new threats. Technology, indifferent to social class, created new kinds of opportunity. But the system, remarkably adaptable, found ways to maintain its old sorting functions even in the face of new forces. Chapter 4. Lotta chicken, lotta boxes. Long before I became an educational researcher, while working minimum wage jobs to fund my sporadic college attendance, I stumbled onto a pattern that would reappear throughout my career. It first showed itself at the Kentucky Fried Chicken on 3rd Avenue, where I learned something fundamental about the relationship between knowledge and authority. The revelation did not come with journal citations or academic language. It came with the smell of industrial fryers and the puzzled look of a fast food manager facing basic arithmetic. Without knowing it, I had encountered a pattern that would echo for decades. Authority figures who did not know what could be known. I was 19, standing behind the counter in a polyester uniform designed for maximum discomfort. The assistant manager, let's call him Dave, was 28. His father knew the owner. He wore his assistant manager pin with the quiet pride of a minor nobleman. The evening ran smoothly until a Little League coach walked in with a large order. 50 identical boxes of chicken, ready in 90 minutes. Dave froze. He stared at the paper like it was written in Sanskrit. "That's a lot of boxes," he kept repeating, as if the observation itself might conjure a solution. "We are going to need a lot of chicken." The problem was not cooking the chicken. Dave could operate the fryers by muscle memory. The problem was the numbers. How many pieces, how many batches, and how to time the cooking. I grabbed a napkin, the universal scratch paper of fast food, and worked it out. We needed 200 pieces. The fryers could handle 64 pieces per batch. I mapped out a cooking schedule to have all boxes ready within 5 minutes of the deadline. Dave stared at the napkin like I had summoned fire from stone. "You can figure that out?" he asked, genuinely amazed. It had never occurred to him that precise planning was even possible. In that moment, something cracked. Authority, I realized, did not automatically follow competence. The person in charge often had no better grasp of the fundamentals than the people working under him. Dave had been managing through instinct and approximation, not calculation. This shattered my childhood assumptions. In my father's factory world, skills built opportunity. Learn more, do more, advance further. Dave's world ran on a different logic. His promotion had nothing to do with technical skill. It had everything to do with connections and meeting visible but shallow expectations. The Little League team got their chicken boxes on time. Dave received praise from the district manager. That night, the lesson stuck. Advancement was not always about ability. It often hinged on who met the visible markers of leadership, even if they lacked real skills. The pattern extended far beyond fast food. As computers transformed workplaces through the 1980s and 1990s, technical skills became critical. Yet the preference for credentials over capabilities remained entrenched. I would later sit in meetings where PhDs misunderstood basic statistics, where technology administrators treated Excel functions as witchcraft, and where school officials panicked at the sight of simple data spreadsheets. Everywhere, the same dynamic played out. Authority was often decoupled from capability. Institutions continued to reward the appearance of competence over the reality of it. The napkin covered in chicken calculations became symbolic. It represented the deep misalignment between what American institutions claim to value and what they reward. The KFC kitchen had revealed a basic truth. Many organizations operated like ships navigated by intuition rather than maps. Problems emerged when changing conditions required skills the leadership never prioritized. These patterns shaped more than my career. They shaped how I understood American education, workforce development, and opportunity. The systems distributing success often overlooked the capabilities they claimed to prize. Real advancement required more than skill. It required navigating invisible systems built on outdated assumptions. Driving home that night, my car heavy with the scent of fried chicken, I could not have articulated everything I had learned. But I understood one thing with complete clarity. If I wanted to survive and thrive in the professional world, I would have to play by rules far more complicated and far less fair than the ones I had been taught to expect. The steam from the fryers faded. The questions it raised never did. The napkin with the chicken calculations revealed something bigger than one night's success. It exposed a system where merit mattered but did not guarantee advancement, where talent alone was not enough, where understanding the system, its myths, its shortcuts, and its blind spots was just as critical as developing skill. In the years ahead, that understanding would guide how I saw education, work, and leadership. Success would not come simply from working hard or mastering a craft. It would come from seeing the hidden machinery behind the myths. Dave may have risen through the KFC ranks, repeating corporate routines without ever learning the math behind them. And I may have continued handing out chicken boxes for a time. But that night planted a seed of understanding that would grow stronger each year. In America, skill and advancement travel on parallel tracks, and they do not always meet. Chapter 5: Shifting Foundations. The 1980s brought a new perspective on educational gatekeeping. As a mathematics teacher, the mechanisms that once blocked my progress now revealed themselves clearly, like watching a magician's trick once you know how it works. Guidance offices operated under unwritten rules about who belonged in advanced courses. When presented with proof of working-class students' talents, counselors responded with startling frankness. "Mrs. Johnson," a counselor explained, "those aren't the kinds of students who take advanced math." Maria, Darnell, and Jason solved complex problems with ease. They were on a first-place team in a regional math counts contest. But they lived in the wrong neighborhoods, with parents who worked the wrong kinds of jobs. In the eyes of the institution, these factors outweighed every test score and recommendation. Each successful placement became an act of resistance. These victories proved the barriers were never real, only traditions propped up by habit and bias. Later, when I moved to a different state, the contradictions between skill and certification grew sharper. My mathematics degree, my teaching experience, my graduate coursework, and none of it mattered without the right certificate. My new state required a different certification. "I'm sorry," the HR director said. "Without North Carolina certification, we can't even interview you." Real expertise meant nothing. Credentialing rituals mattered more. I decided to earn a mathematics education PhD and get credentials in North Carolina. The PhD program revealed the same credentialing games operating at the highest levels of academia. When the department wanted me to supervise student teachers for my assistantship one semester, I pointed out the obvious obstacle. North Carolina law required supervisors to hold state teaching credentials, which I didn't have. This was precisely why I wasn't teaching in the first place, and why I had entered the PhD program. Their response spoke volumes about how the system really worked. "Don't worry about that," they said. "Bill's wife works in the credentialing department at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction." One phone call later, Bill's wife casually asked if I wanted elementary, middle, or high school certification. Without any evaluation of my qualifications, without reviewing transcripts or verifying experience, she simply granted me all 3 certifications. The same credentials that had been an impenetrable barrier when I tried to obtain them through official channels materialized instantly through a personal connection. Once again, the lesson was clear. Who you knew mattered more than what you knew. The system that claimed to guarantee quality through rigorous certification was revealed as a social network dressed up in bureaucratic clothing. Graduate school revealed the same pattern. The education department prized easy credentials over real skills. Professors encouraged students to avoid statistics and pursue curriculum development instead, even though data was becoming increasingly important in education. Research grants poured in to study why minorities and women underperformed in math, all while ignoring institutional barriers. When I suggested that maybe the system, not the students, was broken, the reaction was swift and cold. Later, an aging professor quietly confirmed the truth. We chase the grant money. Solving the problem, or admitting there isn't a problem, would dry up the funding. The education system was not solving inequities. It was profiting from preserving them. Hope arrived when Dr. Lee Stiff became my advisor. He saw what others refused to see. "We don't need a different way to teach math to Black students," he said. "We need to give them access to quality instruction." Working with Dr. Stiff, we built programs to educate teachers in using data to uncover overlooked talent. Instead of studying failure, we focused on expanding opportunity. At the same time, vocational education rebranded itself as Career and Technical Education, CTE. but the changes were mostly superficial. Schools upgraded their names and equipment, but rarely upgraded their assumptions. Computer science programs promised the future, but often delivered little more than outdated basic tutorials on aging machines. The transformation was more about marketing than real opportunity. Underneath the new language, the same sorting machinery hummed on. Chapter 6: Snake Oil and the Grant Economy. By the mid-1990s, I had moved from teaching into the research and evaluation department of a large school district. From that vantage point, the real machinery of educational funding became visible. And it wasn't built to improve student achievement. It was built to preserve itself. The educational grant economy operated by its own peculiar logic. Programs thrived not because they worked, but because teachers liked them, parents felt good about them, and administrators could showcase them at board meetings. Actual student outcomes were an afterthought. Evaluation processes reflected this warped priority. Success was measured by happiness indices, from surveys asking if participants enjoyed a program, not whether students learned more. Hard outcomes like improved reading scores or math proficiency were rarely even discussed, much less demanded. When I proposed using achievement data to evaluate grants, the response was blunt. Federal reviewers mostly want to see that the program was implemented as described. They check the boxes, they don't dig into the results. This reflected a fundamental flaw in federal grant programs of that era. Funding didn't target students based on their individual academic needs. It targeted demographic categories. Our evaluations weren't measuring whether students learned more or achieved better outcomes. They primarily documented that the right demographic groups received services, regardless of whether those particular students actually needed them or benefited from them. A remedial program might serve high-achieving low-income students who didn't need remediation, while struggling middle-class students received nothing. As long as the demographic boxes were checked, the grant was considered successful. Grants were renewed based on following the paperwork and serving the specified demographics, not on showing that students improved. The focus was on inputs, which categories of students received services, rather than outputs, whether those services actually helped anyone. The system wasn't designed to match resources to needs. It was designed to distribute resources to categories. This approach had made sense in an earlier era, when identifying individual student needs would have required manually pulling paper records from thousands of cumulative folders, a task so labor-intensive it bordered on impossible. Finding all students who had failed algebra or read below grade level might have taken administrators weeks of tedious work. Using broad demographic categories as proxies for need was once the only practical solution. But technology had changed that equation entirely. By the 1990s, databases and spreadsheets made it possible to identify specific students who needed specific interventions within minutes. Those who had taken algebra and failed, who read below grade level, or who showed particular patterns of attendance or behavior. We could pinpoint exactly which students needed which services without relying on demographic shortcuts. Yet the federal grant structure remained stuck in the paper folder era, distributing resources based on categories rather than using technology to match help to actual need. The grant economy was operating with a model designed for a technological reality that no longer existed, distributing services based on who students were rather than what they actually needed. Grants were renewed based on following the paperwork, not on showing that students improved. Across districts, the pattern was remarkably consistent. Grants targeted based on demographics rather than demonstrated academic need. Programs evaluated through feel-good surveys rather than evidence of student growth. Renewal decisions made on compliance, not effectiveness. Most of the people involved weren't cynical. They genuinely believed they were helping. But the result was the same. A system built on motion without progress, activity without improvement. Educational snake oil flourished. Workshops, interventions, consultant-driven programs promising transformation while delivering little beyond professional enthusiasm. The deeper irony was inside our own department. The staff in research and evaluation all held the right educational degrees and credentials, but almost none had meaningful skills in data analysis, statistics, survey design, technical writing, or even Excel. They expected support staff to handle technical tasks. And the support staff, who had no training either, often came to me asking how to use Excel, how to analyze basic data, or how to create a graph. One person would take months to create a report for each school, illustrating their data profile. This task could have been done in an hour by merging a data file into a template. But, like my manager at KFC, they didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't know any of these things were possible. The expertise needed to do the work wasn't seen as leadership work. It was considered clerical. Ironically, the clerical staff didn't have the expertise either. No one did. When federal agencies started demanding real data in the late 1990s, the system adapted, not by improving practices, but by mastering the optics of evidence. Districts flooded reports with graphs no one read. Administrators sprinkled data-driven decision-making into every conversation while continuing to make decisions based on tradition and comfort. It was pure data theater, the appearance of accountability without its substance. Chapter 7. The Lotta Chicken Principle. While working in that research and evaluation office, part of my role involved supporting federal and state grant applications. This was the early 1990s, and the winds were shifting. Federal agencies no longer wanted just heartfelt narratives about disadvantaged students. They wanted data projections, demographics, and statistical proof. The grant writing office struggled to adapt. It had been built on charm and personal connections, not analysis. Our head grant writer had spent years crafting persuasive stories, not calculating demographic models. When faced with a federal grant application that required projecting how a new magnet program would affect enrollment patterns across multiple schools, she froze. "This is impossible," she said, her voice rising. "There would be no way to know this until students are enrolled." The moment felt familiar. Her reaction mirrored that of Dave, the KFC manager I'd worked under years before, who panicked when asked to calculate how many pieces of chicken were needed for a Little League team order. It was the same stunned disbelief at the idea that numbers could solve a real-world problem, and that this would be possible to compute. I thought of it as the Lotta Chicken Principle, institutional authority confronting basic quantitative reasoning and blinking in confusion. Just like at KFC, the solution was simple. I created a basic spreadsheet that modeled the student flows across magnet programs based on eligibility criteria and application rates. When I presented the numbers, the team stared at the screen as if I'd conjured them through sorcery rather than arithmetic. The grant was submitted and the school district secured $10 million in federal funding. But the real lesson wasn't about the spreadsheet. It was about how deeply the system still linked leadership to credentialing and connections, not actual capability, even when completing the tasks required specific skills. Across educational institutions, the pattern repeated. PhDs manually summed columns on paper printouts because they couldn't use Excel. Administrators spoke about data analysis, while treating statistical work as clerical labor. Computers sat on desks, expensive and inert, serving mainly as electric typewriters. The world had changed. Technology had made data analysis, modeling, and forecasting essential. But institutions clung to old hierarchies where traditional authority made decisions and technical skill was an afterthought. The Lotta Chicken Principle played out office after office, project after project. Authority remained decoupled from actual capability. Technical expertise remained invisible in leadership structures. Success depended not just on skill, but on knowing how to navigate a system still operating by the rules of an earlier era. Even as technology opened new possibilities, the sorting machine continued running, upgraded slightly, rebranded for modern times, but fundamentally unchanged. Seeing how the system operated from the inside convinced me that real progress would require building something different. It was time to step outside and create the kind of team the work actually demanded. I left the district and started a business to do grant writing, program evaluations, and education research. My hiring approach directly challenged the credentialing mythology I'd observed throughout my career. I built my team based on skill sets, not diplomas, Excel wizards who could transform raw data into actionable insights, statisticians who understood both numbers and nuance, technical writers who could translate complex findings into clear recommendations, web designers who could build data collection systems that worked. The qualifications that mattered weren't framed on office walls. They were demonstrated in the work produced. At first, I hedged my bets by also hiring credentialed educators. The cultural clash that followed was revealing. These traditionally credentialed staff members, despite their impressive educational pedigrees, clearly looked down on the technical team members. They treated data analysis as clerical work beneath their professional dignity. They resisted learning how to create online data collection forms, how to summarize data sets, or how to generate meaningful visualizations, the very skills our clients desperately needed. The credential-based hierarchy was so deeply internalized that they couldn't see these technical skills as core professional competencies rather than support functions. What became abundantly clear was that the system's taxonomy wasn't just wrong, it was backward. The skills it classified as support were central to the work. The capabilities it dismissed as technical were precisely what enabled meaningful analysis and improvement. The hierarchy that placed abstract credentials above practical capability made as much sense as valuing a driver's license over actual driving skill. Building a team that integrated both analysis and action, thinking and doing, revealed just how artificial the traditional divisions had always been. And the results spoke for themselves. Our team's work began showing schools patterns they'd never seen before, helping them identify overlooked talent and match services to genuine needs rather than demographic checkboxes. The perverse nature of this system revealed itself in an encounter that brought my career full circle. While serving on an education task force designed to promote opportunities for low-income students, I met who shared an eerily familiar story. Her high school counselor had also informed her she wasn't college material. Like me, she had defied this judgment, eventually earning a PhD and becoming director of research development at a major university. The irony? That same counselor who had once deemed her unfit for higher education had built her own career in education, ultimately becoming head of research and evaluation for a major school district. This former gatekeeper now oversaw a department responsible for grant writing, data analysis, and program evaluation without possessing any of the technical skills these functions required. Her department struggled with basic data summaries and couldn't develop coherent assessment frameworks. In a twist that perfectly captured the system's dysfunctional logic, this counselor turned head of data and research now hired my company to perform the very analytical tasks her department was created to handle. The person who had once incorrectly judged student potential now led a department that couldn't analyze student outcomes. And she saw nothing contradictory about this arrangement, because the system had never required her to build the skills her job title implied she possessed. The taxonomy that sorted students also sorted educators, promoting credentialing over capability at every level of the hierarchy. This pattern is disturbingly common throughout public education. Research departments, data teams, and evaluation offices are routinely staffed and led by individuals promoted based on credentials and years of service rather than demonstrated technical capability. In district after district, we encountered entire data departments where not a single person could perform a pivot table, create a formula, or design a database query. The professional staff viewed these as clerical skills beneath their status, while the clerical staff had never been trained in them either. The result was educational institutions structurally incapable of understanding their own information, making decisions in an evidence vacuum while surrounded by unused data. The taxonomy that sorted students also sorted educators, promoting credentialing over capability at every level of the hierarchy. Chapter 8. The Persistence of Myths. One of the projects my company took on made the systemic problems even harder to ignore. What we saw inside districts and schools was not just technical incompetence or organizational chaos. It was a deeper, more dangerous belief system, and a quiet but powerful assumption that certain outcomes were inevitable. Even when data proved otherwise, institutions clung to old myths about who could succeed and who could not. One of our early projects took us straight into the heart of this conflict: Pinewood Elementary. The cognitive disconnect we saw at Pinewood Elementary was not an outlier. It was a window into something much bigger, a system-wide belief that poverty and academic failure are inseparable, an assumption so deeply embedded that even hard evidence could not dislodge it. The shift from pre-No Child Left Behind, NCLB, to post-NCLB requirements made this belief visible in ways it had never been before. Before NCLB, grant-funded programs operated on a simple model: serve low-income students, count heads, and file reports. Success was measured by participation, not progress. When data began showing that students in these programs made no academic progress, or in many cases, they performed worse after receiving services, the institutional response was particularly revealing. Rather than questioning the effectiveness of the programs themselves, educators and administrators simply attributed these poor outcomes to the students' demographics. Well, they're low income, was the common refrain, as if poverty itself was an adequate explanation for a program's failure to deliver results. This circular logic created a perfect shield against accountability. Programs serving disadvantaged students were excused from showing positive outcomes precisely because they served disadvantaged students. The demographic categories that were used to identify students for services were then used to justify why those services didn't work. This toxic assumption that certain categories of students couldn't be expected to improve wasn't just wrong, it was self-fulfilling, creating a system where ineffective programs could continue indefinitely without scrutiny or improvement, all while maintaining the comforting fiction that they were serving the underserved. After NCLB, the rules changed. Programs now had to show something new: actual student growth. It should have been a straightforward adjustment, but it wasn't, because it required accepting a reality the system had long resisted. Low income did not automatically mean low-achieving students. At Pinewood Elementary, the pattern played out with painful clarity. The school missed its adequate yearly progress targets, triggering mandatory interventions. They launched a supplemental educational services (SES) program that offered free after-school tutoring for low-income students. The tutoring was entirely remedial, aimed at bringing students up to grade-level proficiency. No enrichment, no support for students who were already excelling. The assumption was simple: if a student was poor, they must be struggling. They hired my company, EdStar, to evaluate the effectiveness of these tutoring services. When we analyzed the data, reality refused to cooperate. The majority of the students receiving tutoring were already reading at or above grade level. Straight A students, top scorers on standardized tests, were pulled into phonics drills they had mastered years earlier. Julie, my technical writer, dug deeper. She contacted the U.S. Department of Education to ask if this was how SES was intended to work. The answer made Washington's internal logic clear. Yes, SES services were for all low-income students. They said it was for all students who were failing or at risk of failing, and only them. But it had to be offered to all low-income students, and only them. The policy wasn't really about improving academic outcomes. It was about offering poor students the kinds of tutoring services wealthier students could afford on their own. In theory, that goal made sense. In practice, it created a bizarre third category: a remedial program targeting poverty itself rather than academic need. At Pinewood, far more students received remedial services than had actually failed their end-of-grade tests. If the tutoring had focused on advanced coursework, it might have made sense. Instead, tutoring locked high-performing students into unnecessary remediation. When we alerted the school system staff, they thought we were telling them the students were not poor. We called it looking-glass logic, a system where achievement data was ignored and poverty alone determined interventions. Good intentions weren't the problem. The real danger was a system that had convinced itself its myths were reality. And the system didn't just carry these myths, it needed them. Every year, it breathed them in a little deeper. As we worked with more districts, the same assumptions appeared again and again. Sarah, my statistician, wanted to see just how deep the assumptions really went. We were evaluating a Title I pre-K program. The district had asked for two things: a measure of effectiveness and a return on investment. So, we asked what should have been a straightforward question. If these students no longer needed remedial services later on, how much money would that save? They looked confused. Then the director of their Title I services said, without hesitation, that stopping services wasn't an option. If the students stopped qualifying, the funding would disappear. They qualified for the services by being low income. That response raised a bigger issue. Was Title Y meant for students who were low income or students who were low achieving? The director paused, then said what the system had been acting on all along. They're the same. During her presentation to the district team, Sarah asked the question no one wanted to answer. If you believe low-income students always need remedial services, and they remain low income after receiving them, does that mean none of your programs are actually working? No one responded, because there was no good answer. The room fell silent. Administrators shifted uncomfortably in their ergonomic chairs. Someone finally suggested moving on to the next slide. They could not even process the question. It directly challenged the logic they lived by. If poverty automatically meant academic deficiency, and remediation did not eliminate poverty, then what exactly was the purpose of these programs? This was not simple bias or ordinary misunderstanding. It was full institutional blindness. The total fusion of two concepts that should have remained distinct. Suggesting they could be separated was like suggesting you could remove oxygen from water and still call it water. The consequences were real. We found case after case where high-achieving low-income students were pulled from regular classes to receive basic remedial instruction they did not need. Students reading far above grade level lost access to real learning opportunities simply because they rode the bus instead of arriving in an SUV. The system had built a new taxonomy. Demographic proxies replaced actual performance data. It was as if hospitals decided to administer chemotherapy based on patients' zip codes rather than medical tests. When we pointed this out, the responses were always the same. But this is how we've always done it. These students need extra help. The deeper truth was that the system had adopted a fixed mindset about poverty. Schools weren't offering remediation to help students catch up. They were offering it under the assumption that poverty created a permanent academic disability, something that could be managed but never overcome. The underlying message was clear. These students were broken. They always would be. The best the system could offer was a little extra attention before they inevitably failed. The system was not trying to close gaps. It was trying to make itself feel better about why the gaps remained open. Good intentions, backed by bad assumptions, built an educational machine that sorted by class while claiming to promote equity. Until those assumptions are dismantled, no amount of new programs or new funding will fix what is fundamentally broken. Chapter 9: Data Theater and the Lotta Chicken Principle. By 2016, the technology available to school systems for analyzing student performance had grown sophisticated. One of the tools districts had access to by this time was the Education Value Added Assessment System, EVAAS. Developed by SAS, EVAAS could predict students' future academic performance based on their past achievement. It didn't just show how students were performing at that moment. It forecasted where they could go if given the right instruction and opportunities. In theory, it was supposed to help schools place students in advanced courses, identify those needing targeted support, and reveal hidden academic potential that traditional sorting often missed. In practice, school systems routinely hired us because, even though state rules now require data-based decision-making for school improvement plans, counseling measurable objectives, and grant applications, most districts didn't know how to work with data. Through years of this work, we discovered just how wide the skills gap had become. Many educators couldn't use Excel beyond basic typing. They couldn't create graphs, perform simple analyses, or even filter columns. Even more troubling, they confused demographic information with academic performance. In their mental model, a student who qualified for free lunch was the same thing as a student who couldn't read. We conducted workshops to tackle this confusion head-on. Using apples and oranges coding activities, we had school staff sort variables into two piles. Things they could influence, like improving reading skills, and things they couldn't, like a student's family income. It sounds simple, but many participants found it difficult. Some even argued, insisting that the bus a student rode to school was essentially the same thing as their academic ability. This confusion made it almost impossible for them to write measurable objectives focused on academic growth rather than demographic labels. When you can't distinguish between the kids' home addresses and their reading levels, making data-driven decisions isn't just hard. It's impossible. It was into this environment that one particular grant program that we worked with landed. A middle school had received funding with an ambitious goal: identify top academic Black male students, move them into advanced mathematics tracks, and offer an enrichment elective to build their problem-solving skills. The school was supposed to use EVAAS to select students, objective data analysis, not teacher impressions or gut feeling. The entire point of the grant was to break the old sorting system that too often overlooked talented students of color. But there was a problem. No one at the school knew how to use EVAAS. They hired me to run the analysis. When I arrived with Cindy, my data analyst, ready to dig into the EVAAS system, the assistant principal beamed proudly and handed us several thick stacks of printed Excel spreadsheets. "This is our EVAAS," he said, with total confidence. What he handed us wasn't AVAS. It wasn't even basic data analysis. It was their old internal placement system, subjective impressions, typed into spreadsheets, dressed up as analytics. Each student had been assigned a label typed directly into a cell on a scale of 1 to 4. 1 equals angel. 4 equals OMG. No test scores, no predictive metrics, no growth indicators. Just gut feelings codified into a spreadsheet, as if entering them into rows and columns magically transformed bias into data. Mr. Smith told us this is the predictive data they use for math placement. When we filtered the sheets, the picture got even clearer. Nearly every Black male student had been labeled a 4. The very students the grant intended to lift up had already been downgraded before the process even officially began. When we asked to see the actual Excel files on the computer, the technical sloppiness told the same story. Staff had manually copied the header row across dozens of screens because no one knew how to freeze panes or use basic database tools. They hadn't sorted the data, filtered it, or analyzed it. They had just printed out subjective impressions and labeled it data. This wasn't just technical incompetence. It was the institutional version of a magic tricks. If you type assumptions into a spreadsheet, they become objective facts. If you arrange impressions in rows and columns, they become predictive analytics. If you wrap bias in digital form, it becomes evidence. When we finally dug into the real EVAS data, after several days of digging, we found 97 minority students who matched the program's academic target profile. High potential students the subjective process had nearly erased. Some of them were in the top 2% in math achievement in the state, yet they were not recommended for the advanced track. We had to select 25 of these students for this program. The rest remained in the standard or remedial math pathways. The system wasn't malfunctioning. It was working exactly as intended, preserving the old sorting hierarchies while maintaining the comforting illusion that student potential had been fairly and scientifically evaluated. The computers hummed on every administrator's desk. The spreadsheets grew thicker by the year. The vocabulary shifted to include words like data-driven and evidence-based. But underneath the surface, the old taxonomy remained untouched. Assumptions in, assumptions out. In the end, schools did not fail because they lacked data systems. They failed because they believed that typing old beliefs into spreadsheets was the same thing as using evidence. Chapter 10. Institutional Mythology. From the guidance counselor who decided I wasn't college material to administrators who couldn't process that low-income students were reading above grade level, one pattern stayed consistent. Mythology is more powerful than facts. This mythology operates through several mechanisms. First, demographic assumptions override actual performance. Whether it was my address in 1974 or free lunch status in 2004, the system continually places students based on stereotypes, not evidence. Second, credentials outweigh skills. From fast food managers who couldn't calculate inventory to district administrators mystified by spreadsheets, and education researchers who think the clerical staff should analyze the data, the pattern stays the same. Titles matter more than ability. Third, evidence that challenges the mythology is ignored or explained away. Faced with clear data showing high-achieving low-income students, districts don't adjust. They dig in. Fourth, federal policy often cements the myths instead of breaking them. Even well-meaning reforms like supplemental educational services ends up reinforcing the idea that poverty automatically means academic need. These aren't abstract problems. Each year, students are sorted, tracked, and given opportunities, or not, based on these myths. The consequences are profound. In an economy demanding both technical skill and analytical thinking, we're still pretending that some students are only capable of one or the other based on background, not evidence. Educational institutions breathe this mythology like air, essential, invisible, and unquestioned. Until we see it clearly, we can't break its grip. Chapter 11. The Machinery of Scarcity. Institutional mythology doesn't just distort how we see students. It builds systems that ration opportunity with ruthless efficiency. When the federal government demanded schools show measurable outcomes, the system panicked. Suddenly, the rituals of intervention weren't enough. Schools flooded themselves with data, endless charts, dense reports, incomprehensible spreadsheets, not to understand student achievement, but to bury inconvenient evidence. Administrators hired my company, EdStar, not because they wanted real analysis. They were drowning in data and had no idea what to do with it. It was like handing a supercomputer to someone who thought it was a very fancy paperweight. Buried in those spreadsheets were thousands of high-achieving low-income students. But instead of advancing them, schools kept pulling them into remediation, languishing in low-level classes while their test scores silently protested. When counselors tried to move these students into advanced classes, the system fought back with the precision of an immune response. Resistance wasn't just passive, it was automatic. I watched it happen again at a district task force meeting. The head of school counseling asked a simple question. Why can't we offer more advanced math classes for these students? The math administrator answered with breathtaking honesty. We don't have enough high school teachers who can teach advanced math. There it was, perfect circular logic. We don't offer advanced classes because we don't have enough teachers. We don't develop teachers because we don't offer enough classes. Round and round. This was the same answer I got in the early 1980s. This wasn't a system failing to act. It was a system functioning exactly as designed. It was manufacturing scarcity while maintaining the comforting illusion that it had no choice. Unfortunately, in education, rationing opportunity isn't an accident. It's the operating model. Chapter 12. Recalibrating the Machine. The college recruiters arrived like missionaries, bearing glossy pamphlets and earnest PowerPoints. They came to save the bright low-income students we had identified through our data work. What they didn't bring was any awareness of the absurdity unfolding right in front of them. These high-achieving students absolutely need to attend four-year universities, insisted Ms. Fernandez, a recruiter from a private college with a sticker price pushing $70,000 a year. She wore the fixed smile of someone trying to sell life insurance at a funeral. Community college would waste their potential. Across the table, Rob Salinger, head of the Computer Integrated Machining program at the local community college, said nothing at first. Rob had once been a manufacturing engineer. Now he prepared students for jobs where starting salaries hovered around $65,000, with almost no student debt. He knew something Ms. Fernandez either didn't know or didn't want to know. Graduates from her school, saddled with six-figure debt, were entering the workforce making an average of $38,000. Our students get hired before they even graduate, Rob said, his voice calm, almost weary. Most finish with zero debt. Ms. Fernandez nodded politely, the way you nod when you've heard a fact you have no intention of allowing into your worldview, and plunged right back into her pitch. To her, Rob's reality was just a minor inconvenience. She was there to sell the dream, not to confront the math. The scene captured perfectly how American education had upgraded its old sorting system. In the 1970s, a counselor told me I wasn't college material. Today, academically talented low-income students are steered relentlessly toward expensive four-year liberal arts degrees, often toward debt burdens they can never reasonably repay, while technical programs, still stigmatized, are left for those deemed academically weaker. The sorting machine hadn't broken down. It had just rebranded. Chapter 13. The New Taxonomy of Educational Sorting. In today's education system, the rules have shifted, but the outcome hasn't. Bright, poor kids are now pushed toward four-year colleges with the language of potential and opportunity, while technical education remains stigmatized as the fallback for students who supposedly couldn't handle real academics. The result is a perfect misalignment. Promising students end up with degrees that don't match workforce demands and mortgage-sized debt they'll carry for decades, while technical programs that could launch strong, stable careers remain starved for attention and investment. This new taxonomy of sorting wears the mask of equity. See, the system says, we're sending smart, poor kids to college now. But underneath, the same old structures remain. College recruiters move through low-income schools like timeshare salespeople, selling transformation without mentioning employment outcomes or debt-to-income ratios. Meanwhile, technical education stays trapped in its old category, a lesser path for lesser students. When I once suggested that a high-achieving student might thrive in an engineering technology program at a community college, the foundation director reacted with something close to horror. "But those students are headed for university," she said, as if I had suggested we send national merit scholars to truck driving school. I tried to explain that these students had chosen technical fields because they wanted hands-on, high-skill careers. She looked genuinely baffled. "But they're capable of so much more," she said. There it was, the mythology in its purest form. Technical education wasn't just different. It was inherently less valuable, less prestigious, less worthy of the good students. Computers might have replaced carburetors, but the system's internal logic never updated. The labels changed. The assumptions stayed the same. Chapter 14. Data as the Great Revealer. The real power of data isn't just in what it measures. It's in what it reveals about the blind spots institutions work so hard to ignore. When we worked with SAS Institute to analyze math placement data for the North Carolina Association for School Administrators in 2009, we found over 30,000 eighth graders who weren't enrolled in advanced math classes, despite being predicted to succeed. These students weren't hiding. They were sitting in plain sight. You could print a list of their names with the EVAAS program. The system simply hadn't bothered to look for them. When we presented these findings to a roomful of educational leaders, one administrator summed up the prevailing mindset. But if they're really that good at math, their teachers would notice and recommend them. It was perfect closed-loop logic. We know who's talented because they're in the advanced track, and they're in the advanced track because we know they're talented. The idea that brilliant students might be overlooked, not because of their ability, but because of their zip code, race, or clothing brand, simply didn't register. Eventually, the state legislature had to step in, passing a law requiring objective placement criteria for advanced math courses. It was a small but real victory for evidence over assumption, for data over mythology. But it shouldn't have taken legislation to recognize what should have been common sense. Placement decisions should be based on demonstrated capability, not filtered through layers of social bias masquerading as professional judgment. Chapter 15. The technology gap nobody discusses. While we've spent years wringing our hands over achievement gaps, one giant embarrassing gap barely gets mentioned. That is the technology gap among educators themselves. It's the same problem I saw in that KFC kitchen years ago. Managers who couldn't calculate a chicken order and didn't even know such a thing would be possible. Today it plays out in school districts across the country, where administrators and teachers lack basic digital fluency, even as they insist they're preparing students for the future. In one district, a curriculum director proudly showed off their latest technology initiative, teaching students to handwrite bibliographies on index cards, following MLA format. This was 2018. Citation management software had been around for 2 decades. When I suggested teaching students to use EndNote, Zotero, or even the built-in citation tools in MS Word, she blinked at me like I had proposed they learn semaphore flags. "But this is how research is done," she said, with the confidence of someone who hadn't touched actual research tools since dial-up internet was a thing. And she wasn't an outlier. District after district, school after school, we found students being taught technology in the form of PowerPoint presentations loaded with spinning text, chirping sounds, and flashing transitions. Meanwhile, nobody taught them Excel formulas, data analysis, or basic database skills that are the core digital competencies modern employers actually want. The blind were leading the blind, except the adult blind insisted they had perfect vision. The result was a generation of students who knew how to insert clip art, but not how to manage a spreadsheet, generate a table of contents with a click, or create an interactive data dashboard. The underlying mythology persists today. Technology is a separate subject, something to teach about, with isolated projects and special classes, rather than an integrated tool for solving real problems. And because so many educators themselves lacked the skills, they can't imagine a different way. We aren't closing the technology gap. We are cementing it one glitter transition at a time. Chapter 16. The Community College Divide. The overhead lights buzzed like tired insects as Martin stared at the federal grant application. 57 pages, $1.3 million on the line, and no real idea how to even begin. Piney Woods Community College served a rural county hollowed out by the closing of its furniture factory. Their equipment was outdated, their faculty overworked, and their budget stretched thinner than the town's crumbling sidewalks. A Department of Labor grant could transform their entire workforce program if they could survive the application process. Martin looked down at the dense government jargon, then at Darlene, his administrative assistant, whose main grant experience was organizing a church bake sale. They weren't just underprepared. They were flying a paper airplane into a hurricane. 20 miles away, it was a different universe. At Metropolitan Community College, Dr. Fernandez's grant office looked like mission control. 3 whiteboards tracked 11 active federal grants totaling $18 million. Her staff included a former McKinsey consultant and a compliance officer who used to manage USAID projects overseas. Grant writing was their full-time job, and they took the job seriously. The contrast was brutal. Metro CC had a NASCAR pit crew. Piney Woods had Martin and a drawer full of manila folders labeled by month. When I asked Piney Woods' accounting manager about their financial tracking, she opened a drawer crammed with photocopied receipts and notes like welding supplies and ask Tony which account. Their accounting software? QuickBooks, 2011 version. Nobody knew how to run reports. Meanwhile, Metro CC tracked every grant dollar across live dashboards with the precision of a Fortune 500 company. The deeper problem wasn't just the money. It was the false assumption built into the entire federal workforce system that all colleges have the same infrastructure to manage complex grants. They don't. Metro CC could navigate the system because they already had a system. Piney Woods was being asked to win a Formula One race on foot. The guidelines don't say you need a professional grant writer and enterprise-level software, Martin said, staring at the thick packet in front of him. It's just assumed. And so the loop reinforced itself. Big colleges got bigger. Small colleges stayed small. Grants flowed to the places that already had resources, while rural communities, the ones that needed help most, were left to patch things together with hope and manila folders. It wasn't malice. It was a system designed by people who had never sat in an office like Martin's, facing a 57-page bureaucratic maze without a map. The absurdity was hard to miss. Federal programs aimed at reducing economic inequality were structurally biased toward institutions least affected by it, and the stakes were painfully real. When the furniture factory closed, Piney Woods didn't need feel-good workshops. They needed skilled welders, advanced machinists, industrial maintenance techs, careers that could rebuild a middle class from the ruins. But funding technical education without first building administrative muscle was like sending a hospital an MRI machine without anyone trained to use it. Some states are starting to fix this with regional grant support centers, shared administrative infrastructure across rural colleges. But those efforts are still the exception. Until we recognize that building capacity is part of solving the problem, we'll keep wasting opportunities, offering grants in theory to places that, in practice, can't access them. Martin gathered the application papers, tapping them into a neat stack with the weary precision of someone buying time. "We know exactly what our community needs," he said. "We just don't know how to get there." Chapter 17. Breaking the Taxonomic Framework. Fixing the system will take more than new policies or better funding. It will require dismantling the entire classification scheme that still separates thinking from doing, academic from technical, theoretical from practical. This artificial taxonomy persists for a reason. It protects the old social hierarchies while maintaining the illusion of meritocracy. It doesn't describe the modern economy. It describes the 19th century one. Today's most valuable workers blur those old lines. They are machinists who understand metallurgy and code, medical technicians who operate complex equipment and interpret diagnostic data, manufacturing specialists who troubleshoot networked robotic systems. These hybrid careers that are technical yet demand high-level analytical thinking are now the fastest-growing part of the economy. Yet schools still train students as if academic and technical are opposites, forcing young people into false choices that don't match the real world. Breaking this pattern means rebuilding from the ground up. First, systematically build technological skills among educators. Sporadic workshops aren't enough. Teachers who aren't fluent with modern technology can't prepare students for modern careers. We need serious, sustained development, not checkbox training that creates the illusion of progress. Second, integrate technological fluency into every part of K-12 learning. Students should use technology to solve real problems, not just learn about it in isolation. Graph data with Excel, not graph paper. Manage citations with software, not index cards. Analyze data sets, not just memorize facts. Third, CTE must deliver real science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM education. Students don't need calculus to wire a control system, but they do need strong conceptual math, basic physics, and the ability to think analytically about technology. Technical education should build serious problem-solving skills, not shunt capable students into watered-down courses just because they chose applied fields. Fourth, confront the class-based assumptions baked into our system. The idea that technical education is for students who can't hack academic work isn't just outdated, it's damaging. It steers capable students away from viable, lucrative careers while selling the fantasy that every liberal arts degree guarantees economic security. Finally, use real data and follow where it leads. Track not just who gets services, but whether those services solve real problems. Track which students end up in which programs, and what happens to them afterwards. And when the data challenges our narratives, change the practice, not the spreadsheet. Our economy has evolved, our students have evolved, our schools must evolve too, or risk becoming relics that train young people for a world that no longer exists. Chapter 18. The View from Both Sides. My journey from being labeled not college material to earning a PhD to evaluating education systems has given me a rare vantage point. I've experienced the system's arbitrary judgments as a student, exposed its hidden mechanisms as a teacher, and documented its systemic patterns as a researcher. What stands out from this view isn't just inefficiency. It's the system's remarkable ability to adapt its labels while preserving its fundamental sorting function. Vocational education becomes career and technical education. Remedial becomes intervention. But the sorting by class, by expectation, by who gets real opportunity remains the same. The real tragedy isn't just wasted resources or outdated practices. It's the systematic misdirection of human potential, propping up social hierarchies while claiming to be meritocratic. For every student like me who eventually found a way around the barriers, countless others had their paths quietly closed, not because they lacked ability, but because the system never really looked. The good news is the tools for change already exist. We have the technology to match educational pathways to actual capabilities. We have strong economic incentives to align education with workforce needs. We even have growing public recognition that the current model serves neither students nor the economy. What we lack isn't resources or ideas. It's the institutional willingness to challenge fundamental assumptions. The belief that technical education is somehow second class, the false division between thinking and doing, the deep habit of using social class as a stand-in for capability. The machine isn't broken. It's operating exactly as it was designed. But the design is outdated and based on assumptions about work, learning, and opportunity that no longer fit the world we live in. Recalibrating the system doesn't require dismantling education. It requires stripping away the myths that separate academic and technical learning into different realms. In the real world, the most valuable workers, the ones we need most, combine theoretical understanding with practical application. The fix isn't radical, it's rational. Use data to find talent, not social labels. Integrate real technological skills across all learning, not just in isolated classes. Inject deep STEM content into technical education, not just college prep tracks. Stop treating technical careers as consolation prizes. The stakes are enormous. Every year, millions of students make choices that shape their lives and futures. Whether they are steered toward opportunity or quietly away from it depends on whether we keep clinging to an obsolete taxonomy of talent or build one based on what people can actually do. Some form of educational sorting will always exist. That's not the problem. The problem is letting the old machinery built to preserve social divisions keep running while pretending we've evolved beyond it. The first step isn't a new program or another grant. It's facing what the data has been screaming for decades. Our educational structures sort by myth, not by merit. And until we fix that, every reform will just be a fresh coat of paint on the same old machinery. The real challenge isn't building a better machine. The real challenge is admitting that the old one was never designed to find talent, only to control it. Thinking versus doing. The false dichotomy, crippling American education. Mathematics is where the sorting starts early and sticks hardest. Students on the college track get conceptual frameworks and analytical thinking. Everyone else gets drills and memorized tricks. For years, basic procedural math was enough to get by. It isn't anymore. In a world built on systems, modeling, and data, procedural math is not just a limitation. It is a trap. College track students get conceptual math, theoretical discussions, and permission to explore. Everyone else gets procedural drills and just enough surface knowledge to pass a test. In this model, understanding is a luxury. Application, a consolation prize. The separation is enforced early, often through guidance counseling dressed up as personalized planning, and hardens over time until the choices feel inevitable. When technology entered classrooms, it should have leveled the playing field. Instead, it became a new sorting tool. Educators who didn't understand the tools themselves reduced tech skills to making slideshows or formatting documents. Students were taught to click and drag, not to understand systems. Computers became electronic worksheets that were more expensive, but just as empty. We spent billions on edtech and ended up with students who could use Blabberize to make a cat look like it was talking, but couldn't analyze a data set or model a real-world problem. Meanwhile, jobs requiring hybrid skills, coding, diagnostics, machine learning, statistical analysis went unfilled, because those tracks were never made available to the students who needed them most. The divide persists because the system still treats technical education as second tier. Even now, when CTE programs require serious STEM knowledge and offer high-wage outcomes, they're pitched as a fallback, the route for those who aren't college material. It's not about evidence, it's about legacy. The system protects itself by maintaining the illusion that technical and academic education belong to different types of people. That some students are meant to think, while others are meant to do. This isn't just flawed logic, it's structural failure, and it continues to misdirect talent in an economy that cannot afford to waste it. Chapter 19, Mathematics Without Meaning. Part 1, The Great Mathematical Taxonomy. High school math in America operates like a caste system. At the top are calculus and advanced mathematics. These are reserved for students bound for selective universities and careers where statistical reasoning carries real weight. In the middle are geometry and algebra 2, preparing students for regional four-year colleges. At the bottom, students are assigned to foundational math and the algebra A-B sequence, 1 year of algebra stretched across 2 years, diluted, slowed down, and credentialed twice for half the learning. Many school districts recommend this pathway for students in the CTE track. When grant-funded programs started tracking the trajectories of high-achieving, low-income students, they uncovered what teachers already knew. Talented students weren't just underserved. They were tracked into math courses so remedial they didn't even meet basic four-year college admission standards. The official fix? Cosmetic. Graduation requirements were rewritten to require 4 years of college track math. Schools adapted the way they always do, not by fixing instruction, but by renaming failure. The remedial math class where students struggled to divide fractions was rebranded College Mathematics Preparation. Same struggles, new title, 4th math credit secured. Curriculum games followed. Algebra splintered into IA, IB, essentials, concepts. The names preserved the illusion of rigor while draining the content dry. The difference between Honors Algebra 2 and Algebra 2 Essentials wasn't just difficulty, it was substance. One taught reasoning, the other taught math as a corpse. Parts labeled no live systems. Students met the technical graduation requirements. They walked the stage. Then they crashed into college algebra like ships built without hulls. Underneath it all was an old assumption, barely disguised. The system still believed that doers only needed enough math to follow steps, while thinkers needed to understand the concepts. Procedural skills were enough for most students. This is what the CTE students are thought to need. Only the college-bound students, the thinkers, need to know the why. That belief shaped everything that came after. Part 2. The Waiting Room for Failure. The math lab at Fairview High looked like a waiting room for bad news. 25 seniors hunched over worksheets, faces frozen in the grim mix of boredom and panic that only a dozen years of math failure can produce. This was Math Concepts for College Readiness, the academic equivalent of a last-chance gas station before the desert of college remediation. These students all scored below 18 on the ACT, said Mrs. Caldwell, the remediation coordinator, as if delivering a terminal diagnosis. If they don't pass this class, they'll spend their first year of community college in remedial math that doesn't even count toward a degree. I picked up one of their worksheets. 30 identical fraction division problems were the same mechanical drills they had been repeating since elementary school. 2 students nearby debated the ritual. "It's crisscross applesauce," one said. "Flip the second fraction and multiply. Remember KCF, Kentucky Chicken Fried? Keep change flip." "Can't we just cross-multiply?" the other asked. 12 years of school, and they still had no idea why it worked. Only that they were supposed to chant and hope for the best. I asked Mrs. Caldwell if she ever explained the reasoning. She looked at me like I had suggested teaching calculus to golden retrievers. "These kids just need to master the procedure," she said. "They aren't advanced enough for conceptual understanding. Besides, they're headed to community college. They won't need this." There it was, naked. Understanding was a luxury for the thinkers. Procedures were enough for everyone else. No wonder students failed. We weren't fixing anything. We were replicating the system that broke them in the first place. Part 3. The Procedural Trap. 3 weeks later, I sat in a Math for Elementary School Teachers workshop funded by a federal grant. Dr. Lee Stiff, smiling with relentless optimism, posed a simple problem. If 2/3 of a class likes cake, and half of those like chocolate cake, how many like chocolate cake? More than half? Exactly half? Less than half? Not enough information to know? The room froze. Experienced teachers, veterans of classrooms, sat blinking helplessly at a basic proportional reasoning problem. "Is that multiplication or division?" someone whispered. Another guessed, "Less than half," but said it like she was asking permission. They could follow scripts. They could drill students in steps. But they couldn't reason through a simple relationship between two numbers. If teachers couldn't do it, what chance did their students have? This wasn't personal failure. It was the product of decades of math stripped of meaning, steps without understanding, rituals without reason, mathematics without mathematics. Part 4. Excel as Algebra Teacher. Back in 1992, I had written a book chapter proposing something radical. Use spreadsheets to teach algebraic thinking. Not to automate homework, but to let students explore relationships in real time. Fast forward to 2018. I demonstrated the same idea to a room of curriculum directors. I opened a blank Excel file and modeled a simple phone plan, a $50 base fee plus 10 cents per minute. In one cell, I entered, equals 50 plus B1 times 0.1. As I changed the minutes in B1, the total cost updated instantly. "This," I said, "is algebra. Variables, relationships, prediction. Students can see the system, not just punch numbers." One director frowned. "But they're not doing the math. The computer is." Another leaned in, whispering like it was a confession. "But will this help them pass the state test?" There it was, the real prison. We weren't teaching students to understand systems. We were teaching them to survive tests built for a world that no longer existed. Outside the walls of the school, technology reshaped industries, demanded new kinds of reasoning, new models of thinking. Inside, we were still drilling procedures designed for the economy of 1955. Part 5. The Real Divide. The real divide isn't between students who can do math and those who can't. It is between students who were taught why math works and students who were only taught how to recite it. It is between students who understand systems, patterns, and relationships, and students who flip fractions without ever knowing why. Until we break the old taxonomy, until we stop pretending that doers only need procedures and only thinkers deserve understanding, we are not preparing students for today's workforce. We are not preparing them for the world they already live in. We are preparing them for failure, and we are doing it systematically. Chapter 20. The Great Technological Incompetence. America's schools have pulled off a strange trick. We produce graduates who live inside a digital world but remain functionally illiterate in its basic language. We have spent billions wiring schools and buying devices, yet we've taught almost no one how to use them meaningfully. We didn't close the technology gap. We paved it over. For 30 years, I've watched the fallout. At Westside School District, federally funded programs tracked services on scraps of paper, binders, and disconnected spreadsheets. Reading specialists didn't know who was getting math help. Math tutors didn't know who was getting reading help. No one knew who was getting nothing. Some kids were getting two of the same service from two different specialists, each who kept their own records and never compared them. When we finally mapped services onto a single spreadsheet for them, students in rows, services in columns, the staff stared at it like we had invented fire. Students receiving duplicate services popped into view. Students receiving no services at all became immediately visible. They were so excited to have this simple, usable information that they printed the spreadsheet out onto multiple pieces of paper, taped them together, and laminated the whole thing so they could show it to principals. This was just a couple of years ago. At Riverview After School, tracking attendance, which was critical for federal funding, meant tallying names by hand on legal pads. When we showed them how to sum attendance days in Excel and made a form for them to log attendance, the program director looked at me with wide-eyed amazement, whispering, "You can do that?" At Lakeside Alternative, progress tracking required printing transcripts and manually calculating credits by hand. Their student database contained all the needed information. Nobody knew how to use it. It was like owning a stocked kitchen but surviving on cold cereal because nobody knew how to turn on the stove. The same pattern was repeated in dropout programs, manually cross-referencing risk factors on legal pads instead of merging 3 spreadsheets electronically. What should have been a 20-minute task, they abandoned after 3 weeks of frustration. This wasn't about effort. Educators cared. They worked hard. They simply had no training in basic information organization, the kind every modern workplace requires. Their confusion wasn't technical. It was conceptual. In one of our data literacy workshops, about a third of educators admitted they weren't confident interpreting percentages. During a simple exercise, we asked this question. If 30% of students in a group are below proficient in reading, what percentage are at or above? A veteran teacher froze, unable to answer. This wasn't a math slip. It was conceptual paralysis. We ran this exercise because we kept seeing the same flawed logic. If a demographic group had the highest percentage of poor readers, many assumed every student in that group needed remediation. But in this case, 70% were reading just fine. The point wasn't the math. It was the assumption. The confusion sometimes crossed into magical thinking. When we built an online system to collect dropout intervention plans, districts were instructed to watch a video and then answer prompts so their customized plan could be generated from their answers. Some watched the video, then stopped, waiting for the plan to appear automatically. When they later asked where their plan was, we explained they had to answer the prompts so we could build it. They seemed genuinely puzzled. We asked, "How did you think we could create your plan without any information from you?" One administrator, speaking for the group, answered without irony, "We don't know how you do anything that you do. It all seems like magic to us." Magic. That was the framework for data. It was something incomprehensible and vaguely mystical. In a world run by data, we built a workforce that treats spreadsheets like sorcery. We didn't just fail to prepare students for the future. We failed to prepare them for the present. Chapter 21. The fix is not radical. The damage is. The divide between thinkers and doers is not just bad educational policy. It is America's most expensive lie. We have built 2 worlds: community colleges quietly turning out skilled workers, universities producing debt-laden graduates with no place to land. Meanwhile, the economy begs for people who can think and do at the same time. This is not a revolutionary fix. It is structural. We need to tear down the wall between academic and technical education. Everyone needs technological fluency, not just fancy slideshows. Everyone needs the ability to organize, analyze, and solve. Community colleges are not backup plans. They are often doing the real work of preparing students for the future. Pretending otherwise only protects a broken hierarchy. The modern economy rewards workers who can conceive and execute. Yet we keep running an educational machine built to separate mind from hand. It is as relevant as a typewriter repairman at Apple. It is a relic we can no longer afford. When baseball started using data, they didn't just tell coaches to figure it out after practice. When grocery stores began tracking inventory, they didn't expect stock clerks to build databases. But in education, we tell teachers and administrators to use data and then leave them to Google their way through Excel. Many want to find students who are off track to graduate on time. They just don't have the tools or the support. They can't generate the lists. They don't know who to ask. We have been hired by the research departments of school systems to help them with their data because they don't have anyone on staff who can work with it. Real change starts with 6 moves. First, stop expecting educators to become data analysts on their own. The expertise required to effectively use education data for decision-making is vastly underestimated. Educators are expected to navigate a labyrinth of specialized knowledge without adequate training or support. This includes identifying which metrics are relevant to specific educational questions, understanding the technical nuances of assessment data, such as the significant changes in North Carolina EOG-level interpretation ranges in recent years, and knowing appropriate benchmarks for standardized measures like ACT subscales. Critical to this process is understanding the policy context that shapes and distorts the data. For instance, attendance policies that result in course failures regardless of content mastery create misleading academic records that require special interpretation. Students who demonstrate subject proficiency but fail due to absence thresholds, need different interventions than those struggling with content. A distinction that affects everything from tutoring program assignments to graduation pathway planning. Beyond mere interpretation, educators must locate data scattered across disparate systems, databases, and platforms, each with its own access protocols and organization schemes. They need advanced technical skills to extract, merge, and clean these varied data sets, often requiring sophisticated Excel functions that go well beyond basic spreadsheet knowledge. Finally, they must transform raw numbers into meaningful insights through statistical analysis and data visualization techniques that make patterns comprehensible to various stakeholders. This multifaceted skill set, combining domain expertise, technical proficiency, statistical literacy, policy awareness, and communication abilities, represents a distinct professional discipline. Expecting educators to develop these specialized capabilities while fulfilling their primary instructional responsibilities is both impractical and inefficient. Instead, schools need dedicated data specialists or robust support systems that allow teachers to focus on applying insights rather than struggling with the technical complexities of generating them. Second, re-educate teachers and school counselors about mathematics. Many were never taught mathematics as a system of ideas. We cannot teach what we never learned. At the very least, educate school counselors and other educators about the difference between the math tracks and help them realize CTE students need a much higher level of math understanding now as compared with 40 years ago. Third, teach conceptual understanding to every student. Math is not procedures. It is relationships, patterns, and systems. Fourth, make technology a tool for thinking, not just clicking. Fifth, teach students how to organize and manage information like professionals, not like clerks. Sixth, align assessments with reality. Stop rewarding rote-hand calculations. Start measuring real understanding. Seventh, recognize and celebrate the opportunities community colleges offer. Eighth, open doors of opportunity for all students. Let data, capabilities, and student enthusiasm be the criteria for guidance decisions, not outdated economic beliefs. The cost of doing nothing is not just educational, it is economic. Remediation burns billions. Talent slips away. Students drop out or stall. The economy falls behind. Other countries are building problem solvers. We are still drilling multiplication tables and calling it preparation. The good news is we do not need a revolution. We need a reorientation. We need to stop chasing easier and start chasing real. Concepts, connections, systems. That is mathematics. That is survival. And the first step is killing the oldest myth we still believe, that some students are conceptual and others are not. That was never true. It was control disguised as guidance. We can keep sorting students by myth, or we can start building by capability. We can keep pretending the economy will wait, or we can start preparing students for the world as it is, not the world we wish it still was. There is no later. The future is already here. The only question is whether we are ready. Afterwards, what you don't know, you don't know. Throughout this book, I've described how our educational system sorts students based on outdated assumptions rather than evidence. I've shown how technology skills are treated as clerical rather than essential. Now, I want to pull back the curtain on what's possible, what educators and administrators could be doing if they understood the basic data tools available to them. This isn't about complex programming or artificial intelligence. It's about simple, accessible capabilities that remain frustratingly underutilized in most school systems today. Each of these tasks should take less than an hour for someone with basic data skills, yet many districts struggle for weeks to produce this information, if they can produce it at all. What's possible in under an hour? Identify students scoring below ACT Math benchmark with GPAs under 2.5. A simple spreadsheet formula or database query can instantly reveal which students need targeted intervention, based on both standardized test performance and classroom achievement. Instead of treating these as separate problems handled by different departments, we could quickly identify students needing comprehensive support. Find academically capable students missing from advanced courses. Using past performance data, we can identify students who match the profile of those succeeding in advanced math, but who weren't placed in those courses. This isn't guesswork or subjective judgment. It's pattern recognition that removes bias from the equation. Within minutes, we can generate a list of students whose talents are being overlooked. Generate a list of students not on track to graduate on time. By combining credit accumulation, course failure data, and graduation requirements, we can identify, with precision, every student at risk of delayed graduation. This allows for early intervention rather than discovering the problem when it's too late. What typically becomes a crisis in senior year could be addressed systematically in earlier grades. Identify students with both attendance issues and multiple suspensions. Combining attendance records with disciplinary data reveals students facing multiple challenges that might be interconnected. Instead of treating attendance and behavior as separate issues handled by different staff members, we can see the full picture of student experiences and offer more holistic support. List students classified as gifted who are above grade level in math. This simple identification helps ensure that talented students receive appropriate challenges and opportunities. Too often, being classified as gifted in one area doesn't translate to appropriate placement in specific subjects, leaving students bored and under-challenged. Create a comprehensive service tracking system. A single spreadsheet can show which students receive which services across the entire school: reading intervention, math support, counseling, special education services, gifted programming, and more. This reveals both duplication and gaps in support that would otherwise remain invisible when each department maintains separate records. The invisibility of the possible. What's striking about these capabilities isn't their complexity, it's their invisibility within the system. Most educators aren't aware these tasks can be completed so efficiently. Many administrators don't realize the information they spend weeks compiling manually could be generated in minutes. This isn't about replacing human judgment with algorithms. It's about using basic data tools to inform better human decisions. It's about spending less time compiling information and more time acting on it. The gap between what's technically possible and what's actually practiced in schools isn't just an inefficiency. It's a profound missed opportunity. Every hour spent manually compiling data that could be automated is an hour not spent supporting students. Every student whose needs remain hidden in scattered spreadsheets represents potential left untapped. Understanding what's possible is the first step toward demanding better systems. We can't continue accepting technological incompetence as inevitable when the costs are measured in student futures. The tragedy isn't that these tools are unavailable or that they require specialized training. The tragedy is that we've normalized their absence in the places they're needed most. Education doesn't need a revolution. It needs technological literacy, the basic understanding that these tasks aren't magic. They're standard functions in any data-driven organization. Until we bridge this knowledge gap, we'll continue sorting students with mythology instead of evidence, missing opportunities that should be obvious, and wondering why our best intentions fail to produce better outcomes. The future isn't coming. It's already here. The only question is whether we're willing to see it. A critical question to ask yourself. As you reflect on the system I've described throughout this book, consider this fundamental question. Since we have demonstrated over and over that teaching rote computing skills does not result in understanding and remembering what was learned in math, why do we have the least skilled teachers who may well not know the underlying concepts or relationships teaching the students who got through 12 years of math remembering nothing? Is the answer that the teachers who do understand the concepts are needed for the advanced math because only they can teach those classes and you can't spare them? This question cuts to the heart of our educational taxonomy. We reserve our strongest mathematics teachers for students already succeeding, while assigning those with weaker conceptual understanding to teach students who need conceptual clarity the most. The students who have failed to grasp mathematics through procedural instruction continue to receive procedural instruction. This isn't just inefficient. It's a self-perpetuating cycle that ensures those most in need of transformative teaching are the least likely to receive it. If we truly want to break the pattern of mathematics failure, we must confront this uncomfortable reality about how we allocate our most valuable resource: teachers who deeply understand mathematical relationships and can make them accessible to struggling students. The answer to this question reveals much about whether we're truly committed to educating all students, or simply managing their progression through a system designed to sort rather than develop.